Hello community, let's talk about trade objects. And so I'm working, as you all know, on an editor. And let's make it very simple. And an editor has like a plugin, which could be, for example, like a file explorer. Now the plugin is a trade. Let's make it just an empty trade because we don't need anything here. And now imagine essentially that the file explorer implements implement plugin for file explorer. And let's make another plugin, which is the status bar. So if we try to make a vec, for example, so let's plugins is a vec of, let's say, file explorer, and the status bar, you will get an error, right? Because it says like the expected file explorer, but it has a status bar, and that's because the vec is for type, and we cannot mix types in a vec. So how do we resolve this? One way is to make an enum, right? Enum plugins. And we now make like file explorer, and status bar, right? And now we can do like plugins. File explorer, and we can now also do plugins, status bar, right? So now we made it work, right, with the enums. But imagine essentially you're developing an editor online, and anybody can make plugins, right? You cannot expect everybody to add their plugins into the official plugins enum, right? So there are another option that is essentially trade objects, right? So when we say plugin is a vec of, let's make it boxed, or let's make it like this, like the dynamic plugin, right? And we remove this and we say now file status bar. Then some errors, exactly. Then we get a size there. That means essentially like we need to know the size, and because each of these plugins is differently, right? Then we of course need essentially reference to this, and this now works. And now we got the plugins, right, where we have different kind of trade objects, right? But imagine we want to make a loop, right, and print it. Yeah, we want to print them, right? But we want to have like a certain type. Yeah, so we want to essentially print the type of the thing. Then we are working here on a trade object called dynamic plugin, right? So if, for example, this trade has something like name, exactly, then we can implement those names. And now we can write name file explorer, and we can write status bar, right? So now we can run this name function on here, right? And we are all happy. The next challenge is let's find the first the first status bar and print it, right? So as you can see, what Copilot essentially suggests here will not find, right? Because we need to use essentially the type system, yep, and use downcasting. Yeah. So let's see, plugins dot. Well, it's in the neighborhood for plugin and plugins. And then we just now say plugin, downcast ref. Now it says, okay, this right, downcast ref. So now it says, oh, we don't have this method downcast reference on plugin. And that makes sense, right? Because we need to now cast the plugin to an any type, right? So let's say let any type is plugin as any. Now it cannot find the type any, right? So let's include it, and now we get an error, right? Because it says, oh, it's like a non-primitive cast, right? And that means that we cannot typecast essentially a reference. So, for example, what we can do is this. Yeah, and now we're getting a little bit in the rabbit hole. And so imagine essentially we make here let file explorer. It's file explorer. And now we want to have the any type is file explorer as any. Right? Then it says this is fine, right? Because it's a trade object, right? Now imagine that we wrap a box around it. Right? Then the any type is suddenly the any, right? Which should not be the case. Let's see how this resolves. So now we get the any type, right? So let's see if we can downcast ref this any type to file explorer. And if we would run this, let's debug this. Yeah, let's implement debug. Yeah, so let's debug this. Cargo 1, and we say, okay, it does not, it's a none. Right? So this didn't work. This didn't work, right? And that is because this is the file explorer is a box, right? And we shouldn't be able to do this, right? So if we now do the following as box then any, right? Then still this compiles, but if you run it, we get a file explorer, right? So this works. Now comes the interesting part, right? So let's make here a file explorer reference, which is a reference to file explorer. And now we say if we make the file explorer it's a reference as box.dn, reference of box.dn. Now we get this interesting error again. An as expression can only be used to convert primitive types, right? So that means like there's a difference between casting file explorer, right, which is like an object, between a reference to an object, right? And this is something the type system of Rust, essentially because a reference essentially to something is a different kind of type than a reference. So to illustrate this, so let x is 5, and let's make it explicit, so it's I32. Now we can say let I is x as float 64, not a problem, right? Yeah, so if we debug this y, we will see a nice conversion, right, to 5.0, right? So that works. Now, imagine we do it differently, right? So let x reference is a reference to x, and now we say like let y reference is x reference, right? But now as reference to f64, now also we get this non-primitive cast, right? So there's a difference between casting like values and casting references, right? So if we ever make some kind of loop, right, where we want to do something with, let's say, trade object with boxes, and we are walking through them essentially as in a loop, we run into problems, right? So let's simulate this. So let's make boxes out of this. So we now make a box, new file explorer, and here we also make a box, new status bar. So this now becomes a vec of a box file explorer, but plugin. Sorry, a dynamic trade object of plugins. And we would now again establish our loop here. Now we will immediately see we have a problem here, right? Because it says there's no method name downcast ref found for this boxed-in plugin, right? Which makes sense. So if we now do as reference, so we get essentially the value out of the box, we get a reference out of the type out of the box, we have the same, right? So what now if we do this as dynamic any? Now what we get is a non-primitive cast, right? So we are in a bit of a pickle here, right? So how can we now downcast a box? Luckily, we have a method called downcast on the box, right? Which doesn't work, by the way, because it again requires like this plugin as an any, right? And we got the box.din plugin as a method here. So we could do this now, right? Plugin as box.din any, right? But now we get another error, right? Which says, again, a non-primitive cast. A non-primitive cast of din plugin as box.din any. So, as ref doesn't work. So essentially, we're in a kind of a pickle here, right? So one solution here is to use the method here called AsAny. And now we can define our trait as an AsAny. Let's add it into the scope. import AsAny. And what we can do now is plug in. And now suddenly, magically, it implements downcast ref. On the type, right? And so not on the box, right? So let's see. It needs also this downcast ref. We again do an option. So now what we have is an asRef method, which returns this downcast ref method, which returns to status bar, right? So let's see if we actually found the status bar. Yes, it found the status bar, right? And we can also, let's say, but now essentially this is also, we could also make this work on a different way because it's on the box, right? So imagine we're working on references and this still works, right? So how does this work? Let's go and look at downcast ref. So downcast ref works on AsAny and downcast ref. And if you look at AsAny, it's a trait which has which defines these methods, right? Also gives back the type name, by the way, which is pretty cool. And AsAny for T, it implements here a conversion to reference to a trait method any is a helper. And here it returns the sign, right? And then we got also this downcast trait, right? Which is implemented on anything that implements AsAny, which has these methods like is, downcast ref, and downcast mood. Right? So this helps us enormously when working with trait objects, and especially working on trait objects when referenced in, let's say, when we're working on references to boxes, right? Okay. I hope this was useful, this little Rust Tapas. Please like and subscribe and let me think what you think. Okay.